All right, let's jump right in, shall we? Welcome to our deep dive, and today we're tackling the book of 1 Samuel.
Ah, First Samuel.
It's a wild ride, right? Full of drama.
Oh, absolutely. Intrigue. Timeless lessons.
We're going to explore the whole book together, uncovering some hidden gems, and hopefully connecting those back to you, our listener, today.
What I find so fascinating about First Samuel is that it really captures this pivotal moment, in Israel's history.
Okay.
It's the transition from judges to kings. We see the Israelites kind of grappling with this shift. They're yearning for a leader, someone who can unite them and give them that sense of national identity.
It's almost like sometimes when I'm reading 1 Samuel, it's like, am I reading a soap opera? You've got these power struggles, jealousy, betrayal. I mean, even maybe a love triangle or two in there.
Oh, yeah.
But beyond the drama, 1 Samuel raises these profound questions about leadership, faith, the consequences of our choices. It's really, really deep.
Exactly. And all this is set against, this backdrop of divine intervention. God is active in the lives of these characters.
Always.
Guiding their paths and ultimately shaping the destiny of a nation.
I love how it starts. Let's dive into the first part of the book, shall we? We meet Hannah.
Oh, Hannah.
And this woman is desperate for a child.
Yes.
Her silent prayer in the temple where her lips are moving but no sound is coming out. Every time I read that, it just breaks my heart. It's such a powerful image of just deep, deep faith in the midst of suffering.
It's a prayer I think many of us can relate to, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
That feeling of just pouring our hearts out to God even when we don't have the words. And what's striking is that Hannah's prayer, it's actually recorded in poetic form within the prose narrative.
Interesting.
It adds this layer of emotional intensity, really emphasizes, the depth of her longing and the unwavering nature of her faith.
Yeah, it's almost like, across the centuries, we can still hear her heart crying out to God. And speaking of contrasts, I mean, we see this stark difference between Hannah and Eli's sons. I mean, they're abusing their position as priests, while Hannah is completely devoted to God. It's like a commentary on what true service looks like.
Yeah.
What do you think about that contrast? Does it resonate with you at all?
I think it's a theme that runs throughout 1 Samuel. This tension between genuine faith and empty religious ritual. We see it with Saul's sacrifices, the people's reliance on the Ark of the Covenant as like a magical object, and even later with David's attempts to manipulate God's favor.
They're all looking for those outward signs of power and success.
Right.
But true faith, it's about something much deeper, isn't it?
It is.
It's about aligning our hearts with God's will, even when it's difficult.
And that brings us to the rise of King Saul.
All right, King Saul.
The Israelites, they're demanding a king, someone who can lead their armies and make them feel powerful. They want to be like all the other nations, but they've forgotten that their true king is God.
It's like they're trading true security for a false sense of control. And Saul, at first, he seems like the perfect choice. He's tall, he's handsome, he's victorious in battle. But, as we dig deeper into his story, I think we see outward appearances can be deceiving.
Saul is fascinating to me. He starts so strong.
He does.
But his reign, ultimately, it's marked by disobedience and this growing paranoia that just consumes him.
Oh, yeah.
It's a classic example of how power, if it's not grounded in humility and obedience to God, can corrupt even the most promising individuals.
And his jealousy of David, oh man, it makes everything worse.
Oh, it does.
And there's this chilling scene where he massacres the priests at Nob just because one of them helped David. It's like he's completely lost his moral compass.
That scene is pivotal. It demonstrates the extent to which Saul has fallen from God's favor.
Wow.
His actions, driven by fear and a lust for power, it ultimately destroys him.
It makes you think, about the leaders in our own lives. What qualities truly matter? Integrity, compassion, a willingness to serve others.
Absolutely. 1 Samuel invites us to consider what true leadership looks like, both in the public sphere and in our own personal lives.
That's good.
It's not about dominance or control.
No.
It's about humility, wisdom, and a deep sense of responsibility.
Okay. Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about David.
Dave.
I mean, this guy starts out as a shepherd, and then suddenly he's facing a giant. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
The story of David and Goliath is a classic for a reason. What stands out to you the most about this story?
It's a testament to the power of faith and courage in the face of, seemingly insurmountable obstacles. What's interesting to me is that David doesn't rely on traditional weapons. He chooses stones and a sling, symbols of his trust in God's provision.
He's like, giant. no problem. I've got my faith and my trusty slingshot. And of course he wins, but, as we all know, his troubles are far from over.
Saul becomes consumed by jealousy, and he repeatedly tries to kill David. It's during this time of persecution that we really see David's character truly tested. He's complex, he's both flawed and chosen, and his story, I think, invites us to reflect on our own strengths and weaknesses and our dependence on God.
There's this poignant scene, I love this scene, where David spares Saul's life in a cave. He could have killed him.
Oh, he could have.
But he just cuts off a piece of his robe.
Yeah.
Talk about showing mercy to somebody who is actively trying to kill you. Why did he do that?
That act of mercy reveals, I think, a key aspect of David's leadership. It's respect for God's anointed, even in the face of adversity.
Yeah.
He understands that vengeance ultimately belongs to God.
It takes incredible self-control to resist that kind of temptation.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could have done that in his shoes.
I think that's what makes David's story so compelling, right?
Yeah.
He's not a perfect hero. He makes mistakes. He struggles with temptation.
Yeah, he does.
He sometimes acts impulsively. But through it all, you see these glimmers of the leader he's meant to be.
It's like we're watching him grow and mature right in front of our eyes.
Mm-hmm.
He's not perfect. And that brings us to a theme that I see recurring in 1 Samuel. It's the consequences of obedience and disobedience to God's commands.
We see it with Saul's failure to completely destroy the Amalekites.
Yeah.
Eli's failure to discipline his sons, and even with David later, his adultery with Bathsheba.
Yeah.
Each of these choices has major repercussions, not just for the individuals involved, but for their families and the nation as a whole.
It's a powerful reminder that our actions have consequences, not just for ourselves, but for generations to come. That even the most promising leaders can fall prey to temptation, to pride. What about you? What choices are you facing right now that might have far-reaching consequences?
1 Samuel challenges us to examine our own motives, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. And to seek wisdom in our decisions. It reminds us that true success isn't measured by outward achievements,
right,
but by faithfulness to God's will.
Wow. And that's just the first part of the book. We've barely scratched the surface of David's journey and all the twists and turns that lie ahead.
Oh, yeah.
So much more to uncover.
Stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive into 1 Samuel. We just finished exploring the first part of the book, where we saw Hannah's heartfelt prayer, Saul's tragic downfall, and of course, the beginning of David's rise.
It's amazing how much is packed into those opening chapters, isn't it?
Oh, it is.
We've already seen so much drama, intrigue, and those timeless lessons you mentioned earlier.
Absolutely. And as we move into the second part of 1 Samuel, the stakes just get even higher.
Oh, yeah.
We see David navigating this treacherous landscape, caught between Saul's relentless pursuit and the growing expectations of those who see him as the rightful king.
I mean, he's constantly on the run, right? Mm-hmm. Always one step ahead of danger. But even in those moments of vulnerability, you see these flashes of his incredible leadership potential.
One of the most striking examples of this is the story of the Ark of the Covenant.
Oh, yeah, the Ark.
Remember, the Philistines had captured the Ark in battle?
Yeah. They thought it was going to give them some kind of ultimate power, but they quickly realized they'd bitten off more than they could chew.
It's like they accidentally invited a divine house guest who brought all sorts of chaos with them.
Exactly. The text actually describes plagues and disasters striking the Philistines wherever they take the Ark. It's as if God's presence, symbolized by the Ark, was too powerful for them to contain.
So how do they finally get rid of this divine hot potato? Did they just, drop it off at the nearest Israelite post office?
Not quite. They eventually realized they needed to send it back to Israel.
Okay.
But not empty-handed. They were instructed to offer a guilt offering, acknowledging their wrongdoing, seeking forgiveness.
It's like a cosmic apology gift basket. What was in it? Fruit basket.
Yeah.
Spade. Gift certificate to their favorite Philistine restaurant.
Haha. Think a little more symbolically. They sent 5 gold sores and 5 gold mice.
Okay.
Representing the plagues that had afflicted them. Pretty vivid image, don't you think?
Yeah.
It is. I can picture those little gold mice scurrying across the table. But they didn't just, hand over the Ark to some random Israelite, right? They put it on a cart, pulled by 2 cows that had never been yoked, and they just let them go wherever they pleased.
It was a test. They wanted to see if God would truly guide the Ark back to Israelite territory.
Right.
And of course, the cows, they went straight to the town of Beth Shemesh.
Talk about divine GPS. It's like those cows had a one-track mind. Homeward bound. What does this return of the Ark tell us about God's relationship with Israel?
It symbolizes, I think, the return of God's blessing. It signifies a shift in the relationship,
the
renewal of their covenant. But it also serves as this reminder that God's holiness and power, they must be treated with reverence and respect.
I mean, we see this when some of the people in Beth Shemesh, they're actually struck down for looking into the ark.
Right.
Wow.
It's a reminder that even in those moments of celebration and rejoicing, we need to approach God with humility and awe.
So the ark is eventually moved to Kiriath Jearim, where it remains for years under the watchful care of this guy named Abinadab. Okay, so the ark is back in Israel. But Saul, he's still struggling.
Yeah.
And David is still on the run, trying to survive while also dealing with those growing expectations of those who see him as the future king.
It's fascinating, this period in David's life.
It is.
He's forced to rely on his wits, his courage, his faith to navigate. I mean, it's a landscape filled with danger and uncertainty.
It's like he's being forged in these fires of adversity.
Right.
What's so interesting to me is that he actually spent some time seeking refuge among the Philistines.
Oh, yeah.
His sworn enemies.
Right.
That just seems like a risky move.
It is. It's a move that highlights, I think, the moral ambiguity of his situation. You know, he's caught between loyalty to his own people and the need to protect himself. And it also reveals a certain shrewdness and an adaptability that will serve him well later as king.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I could see how this experience would have shaped him, you know, for better or worse. It's like he's learning to play the game of politics and power, even as he's trying to stay true to his values.
And it's during this time that we see David's character truly tested.
Yeah.
He's not this saintly figure. He makes mistakes. He compromises his ideals.
He does.
And sometimes he acts in ways that are, frankly, quite disturbing.
Okay, I need an example. What are we talking about here?
Well, there's the incident with Nabal, this wealthy but very foolish man who insults David and his men. David, enraged by this perceived injustice, he vows to kill Nabal and all the males in his household.
Whoa. That escalated quickly. I can understand his frustration, but that seems like an extreme reaction.
It is. It's important to remember the context.
Okay.
David and his men, they've been protecting Nabal's flocks, his shepherds. They're met with just scorn and ingratitude. It's a moment of vulnerability and rage for David. It highlights the emotional toll, I think, of his constant exile, but it also raises these questions, you know, about his ability to control his impulses, to act with wisdom and restraint.
So do you think this foreshadows some of his struggles later as king?
It certainly hints, I think, at a tendency towards impulsiveness and a capacity for violence that will reemerge again in his reign. But before David can actually carry out his revenge plan, Nabal's wife, Abigail, she steps in.
Abigail. She's one of my favorite characters in 1 Samuel. She's intelligent, she's courageous, and she's not afraid to stand up to David even when he's in a rage.
Remarkable woman.
She is.
She intercepts David and his men, appeals to his sense of justice, and reminds him of God's ultimate authority. She points out that Nabal is a fool, and ultimately he will face divine judgment.
She's like, David, let God handle this. You don't need to get your hands dirty.
Exactly. And David, to his credit, he listens to her.
He does.
He recognizes his own rashness and acknowledges her wisdom. It's a moment of self-awareness and restraint that really speaks, I think, to David's capacity for growth and change.
It shows us that he's not just this warrior. He's a leader who can be persuaded by reason, who values wisdom over brute force.
Right. And there's another interesting twist to this story.
Okay.
Nabal dies shortly afterward.
Oh, wow.
And David ends up marrying Abigail.
Really?
It's as if God used this difficult situation to bring about a greater good.
It's a reminder that even in the midst of chaos and conflict, God is still working behind the scenes, orchestrating events to fulfill his purposes. But speaking of twists and turns, what about that scene where David sneaks into Saul's camp and could have killed him in his sleep?
That is a pivotal moment, I think, in their relationship.
Oh, yeah.
It demonstrates David's deep respect for God's anointed king, even when that king is trying to kill him.
Why do you think David spares Saul's life? Is it purely out of respect for God's authority, or is there something else going on?
It's a question that has fascinated readers, I think, for centuries. Some see it as a sign of David's piety, his unwavering commitment to God's will.
Right.
Others interpret it as a strategic move, a way to gain the moral high ground, you know, to avoid bloodshed that could further divide the nation.
It's interesting to consider both perspectives, isn't it?
Yeah.
It just shows us the complexity of David's character, the multifaceted nature of his motivations. So what does Saul do when he realizes what's happened?
He's overwhelmed, I think, with shame and remorse. He acknowledges David's righteousness.
Wow.
And even admits that David will one day be king.
Really?
It's a moment of reconciliation, a brief glimpse of what their relationship could have been.
But of course it doesn't last, right?
Right.
Because this is 1 Samuel. Happy endings are in short supply.
That's true. Saul's jealousy and paranoia, they soon resurface, and the pursuit of David continues.
Yeah.
This tragic cycle of reconciliation and renewed conflict, it reveals, I think, the depth of Saul's inner turmoil.
It's like he's trapped in this self-destructive spiral, unable to break free from his own demons. And it ultimately leads to his downfall.
But before we get to the tragic end of Saul's reign, there's another important episode we need to discuss. It's David's time among the Philistines.
Okay.
Remember, he had sought refuge with them earlier. But now they're at war with Israel, and David is forced to choose sides. What would you do? How do you balance loyalty to your people with the need for self-preservation?
It's a classic dilemma, isn't it? It's a question that I think a lot of us face in our own lives. Maybe not on such a grand scale, but still with significant consequences.
The Philistine commanders are very suspicious of David's loyalty.
Yeah.
So they tell him to go back home.
Okay.
It's a blessing in disguise because it prevents him from actually fighting against his own people.
That was a close one. But his troubles aren't over yet.
No, they're not. Because while he's away, something terrible happens back in Ziklag.
Oh, no.
The town where he and his men have been living, tragedy strikes. The Amalekites raid Ziklag. They burn the town and take everyone captive, including David's wives.
Wow. Every time it seems like David takes one step forward, he gets pushed 2 steps back. How does he handle this?
It's a test of his faith and his leadership. The men are devastated.
Oh, yeah?
They blame David for their misfortune.
I bet.
They even talk about stoning him.
Wow.
But instead of giving in to despair or lashing out at his men, David turns to God for strength.
Okay.
He inquires of the Lord, and he receives guidance to pursue the Amalekites.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of moments, even when everything seems lost, we can still find hope and direction in prayer.
And David's faith is rewarded. He rallies his men, they pursue the Amalekites, and they recover everything that was stolen, including his wives.
It's like he's saying, see, guys, I told you we could trust God. Now let's go get our stuff back.
It's a moment of triumph that really restores his authority.
Yeah.
And reinforces his dependence on God.
Absolutely.
Right.
But as we approach the final chapters of 1 Samuel, the mood kind of shifts again. I feel like the shadow of Saul's impending doom just looms large over the narrative.
The tension is building. You can feel the climax approaching. The Philistines amass this massive army.
Yeah.
And Saul, he's just filled with fear and despair. He's desperate for any kind of guidance. And so he does something that was strictly forbidden by God. He consults a medium.
Oh, that can't be good. I have a bad feeling about this.
You're right to be worried. The medium conjures up the spirit of the prophet Samuel.
Oh.
And Samuel confirms Saul's impending doom.
Oh, no.
He prophesies that Saul and his sons will die in battle the next day. What do you think about Saul's decision to consult a medium? Was it an act of weakness or just a desperate attempt to find some kind of hope in a hopeless situation?
It's a tough question, and I think it just highlights the moral complexities of leadership. I mean, Saul is clearly struggling with fear and uncertainty, and he's willing to cross these boundaries that he knows are wrong.
It's a reminder that even the most powerful leaders are human. They're prone to mistakes.
Yeah.
Driven by this desire for control, even when it leads them down a dangerous path.
So how does it all end? What happens to Saul and his sons?
Well, the final chapters of 1 Samuel describe the battle against the Philistines, the death of Saul's sons, and Saul's own tragic suicide.
It's a heartbreaking end to a reign that began with so much promise. And it sets the stage, of course, for David's ascension to the throne.
But it's not a simple transition. You know, with Saul's death, the kingdom is actually divided.
Oh, wow.
Setting the stage for a period of civil war and conflict. But that's a story for another time. For now, we need to take a break and let the weight of these events sink in.
This deep dive has taken us on a roller coaster ride of emotions. From hope to despair, from victory to defeat, it's a lot to process. But before we wrap up this part, I want to ask you, what has stood out to you the most so far? What moments have resonated with you? What questions are you still wrestling with? We'll pick up the conversation in our final segment and explore the lasting impact of 1 Samuel on our lives today. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into 1 Samuel. It's been a wild ride, hasn't it?
It has.
We've journeyed through those highs and lows of Saul's reign, witnessed David's incredible resilience, and explored the complexities of faith, leadership, and the consequences of choices.
And now we're at a pivotal moment in Israel's history. Saul is dead, his sons are dead, and the Philistines are celebrating their victory.
Right.
But amidst the chaos and despair, a new chapter is about to begin.
It's like we're standing at the edge of a precipice, looking out at this uncertain future. We know David's destined to be king, but the path ahead is far from clear.
The final chapter of 1 Samuel focuses on the aftermath of the battle and the beginning of David's rise to power.
Okay.
It's this moment of transition where the old order crumbles and a new one emerges.
So let's set the scene, all right. The Philistines, feeling pretty smug about their victory, they decide to display Saul's body and the bodies of his sons on the wall of Beth-shan as, this gruesome trophy.
It's a deliberate act of humiliation.
Yeah.
Intended to demoralize the Israelites and assert Philistine dominance. They want to crush any remaining hope, or resistance.
But they underestimate the power of loyalty and courage.
They do.
Because the inhabitants of Jabesh-Gilead, this town that Saul had once rescued from Ammonite oppression, they hear about this desecration and they are outraged.
It's a testament to the impact Saul had on their lives. They remember his kindness, his bravery, and they refuse to let his memory be tarnished.
They decide to act, and this is where it gets really interesting. They risk their own lives, sneaking into Philistine territory and retrieving the bodies of Saul and his sons.
Imagine the audacity. They're outnumbered, outgunned, but they're driven by this sense of duty, this fierce loyalty to their fallen king.
It's a daring rescue mission. They bring the bodies back to Jabesh-Gilead and give them a proper burial. They honor their memory, and they defy the Philistines' attempt to erase their legacy.
It's a poignant moment that shows even in death, Saul is not forgotten.
Right.
And it also subtly foreshadows David's future reign.
How so? What connection do you see between this act of loyalty and David's leadership?
David, like the men of Jabesh-Gilead, will be known for his loyalty, his courage, and his respect for the fallen, even those who were once his enemies.
Okay, so while the Philistines are busy gloating and the people of Jabesh-Gilead are carrying out their daring rescue, David is back in Ziklag, having just dealt with the aftermath of the Amalekite raid. And that's when he receives the news that changes everything.
He learns of Saul and Jonathan's deaths, and he is devastated, especially by the loss of Jonathan. I mean, their friendship, it was one of the most beautiful and complex relationships in the entire Bible. It transcended political rivalry, familial loyalty, even death itself.
I think it's interesting you highlight their friendship, because it's easy to get caught up in the power struggles and the military campaigns. But 1 Samuel is also a story about deep personal connections, love, loss, and the enduring power of human relationships.
Absolutely. And David's lament for Saul and Jonathan, it's a masterpiece of poetry and grief. Mm-hmm. It's raw, it's honest, it speaks volumes about the depth of their bond.
Yeah, I think we've all experienced loss in different ways. And David's lament, it captures that universal human experience of grief. That sense of emptiness and longing that sometimes words can't even express.
And it's a reminder that even in the midst of victory, there is always a cost.
Wow.
David understands that leadership comes with a heavy burden and that even the most righteous of kings, must face sorrow and loss.
It humanizes David, right?
It does.
It shows he's not just this warrior or this political strategist, but a man who feels deeply and who understands the weight of responsibility.
And as we approach the very end of 1 Samuel, that weight of responsibility becomes even more apparent. David receives a message from God telling him to go to Hebron, a city in Judah.
This is it. It's the beginning of David's kingship, but as you mentioned earlier, it's not like this straightforward coronation.
The Israelites were divided into 12 tribes, and those tribal divisions, they remained even after Saul became king.
Okay.
Now, with Saul's death, those divisions come to the forefront. David is anointed king of Judah, but the other tribes remain loyal to the house of Saul.
So the kingdom is split, and instead of a unified nation under David's rule, we have the potential for civil war and conflict. What a cliffhanger ending.
It's a brilliant way to end the book because it leaves us with this sense of anticipation and uncertainty. We know David's story continues, but 1 Samuel ends here on the cusp of a new era, with both the promise of greatness and the shadow of future challenges.
It's like we've reached the end of one journey and are about to embark on another, even more epic adventure. But before we say goodbye to 1 Samuel, what are some of the key takeaways from this deep dive? What lessons have resonated with you the most?
1 Samuel is a book that challenges us, I think, to think deeply about leadership, faith, and the choices we make in our own lives. It reminds us that power, if it's not tempered by humility and obedience to God, can corrupt even the most promising individuals.
Right.
It shows us the complexities of human nature, the struggles we all face, and the enduring power of grace and forgiveness.
It's a story that speaks to the human condition. It's a story about ambition, betrayal, loyalty, love, loss, and the search for meaning in a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain.
It invites us to reflect on our own lives, our own choices, and the legacy we want to leave behind.
As we wrap up this deep dive into 1 Samuel, I want to leave you with this. What will you take away from this story? How will it shape your understanding of leadership, faith, and the choices you make in your own life? Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.